If you want to learn more about effective management, head over to mattsingers.com and sign up for my free management training.
Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello, and welcome back to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today I have a visitor all the way from Dublin, which is Sinead Kearns. So welcome, Sinead.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here today.
Awesome. I'm super excited to have you on board. You're smaller business owners, and I often work a lot with small business owners, but I haven't actually interviewed that many on the podcast yet. So super excited to hear a little bit more about your background and so on. But just before we get started, as usual, there is people around the world who don't yet know who you are. So would you mind doing a little bit of an introduction and letting them into how you ended up where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Sinead, and I'm the owner of a small online clothing business called Arlo Blue. I was originally a teacher and loved my job, worked in a disadvantaged school in Dublin, was really, really active in the school. But I guess during the sort of recession here, sort of 10 years ago, things in school became quite difficult in terms of there was nowhere to move. There was an embargo on all sort of promotions, and I guess being an ambitious person, it was difficult for me to see that I was going to keep doing the same thing and not being able to progress a little bit. And even though teaching had probably always been what I wanted to do, about 10 years prior to that, again, my dad had said to me, it's a good idea to think about being your own boss, because, then you can't really be let down by anyone, only yourself. And that was always ringing in my ears a little bit. And my dad had been let down, I suppose. A typical Irish family, there was 6 children. And when I was, I think, about 12, he was an accountant, and he was made redundant from a job. And all of a sudden he wanted to put 6 children through university, and the funds weren't there. So I think he was, a bit burned by that. And he had always said, think about being your own boss. But my mom was a teacher, and I thought I wanted to do that. And I did, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But that his little words were kind of in my ear about, maybe think about being your own boss. So I had this 2 ideas. One was that I love sports. So I was like, could I do something in sport? And the other thing was fashion. And I decided fashion was their way to go. And one of the things that frustrated me just back then was it was really hard to get good quality basic items that weren't at a really high price point, or that weren't sort of fast fashion. So somewhere in the middle. And that's kind of where it started. And I started the search, and I went back and I did a couple of fashion qualifications. I did a fashion styling qualification and a fashion buying qualification to sort of give me a little bit of background. And got into the research of how to start a clothing line. So that's the background, I guess.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a lot of fun.
I've really enjoyed it. Yeah.
One of the good things I've actually seen generally teachers make amazing managers, because they're so used to working with people. And I'll actually say probably my number one inspiration to getting into management was definitely a teacher as well.
That's amazing. I fully agree. And you know what, because of COVID, I have gone back and helped out some days in my own school, and I'd forgotten how exhausting teaching was and how much management is involved, even with the smallest of kids. So I think it gives you such an unbelievable sort of base for management and multitasking and trying to do many things at one time and keeping all the plates in the air. So absolutely, it was a great foundation for me.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So obviously, I mean, from a management standpoint, starting out a business from scratch is obviously not an easy task. I think One of the issues I always had is when people have been in business a while, the problem is always shiny objects, right? And when you've been an entrepreneur for a couple of years, you tend to see 4 new ideas every day and wanting to start a couple of new businesses every minute. But I think in the beginning that the difficult is always starting up, right? It's always finding the idea, and I think a lot of people initially put too much emphasis on the idea itself rather than just pick something and go with it. But yeah, starting up is hard, right? But
Yeah.
you've been through it. So when did you start up exactly?
Well, I suppose 2017 was when the sort of research and that was going in, and I was doing a little bit of like personal shopping and styling, and that was giving me a really good idea of what women's problems were with clothing. And again, people were like, I can't find a white t-shirt that, is like okay quality, or that doesn't cost, 80 euro or whatever. So that really gave me, so then that sort of allowed me to start considering developing the product. But yeah, it was a complete minefield for me. I really didn't know where to begin. Like I took to Google a lot to find out how to do things. And it was really difficult because having been, a teacher for 10 years, I went into school every day and there was nothing in that time that was new. Mostly every day I knew what was going to be thrown at me. And when I was starting the business, it was just every day I didn't know how to do something. And there was lots of days where I just thought, oh, I don't know if I've taken on too much, if it's more, bitten off more than I can chew. It was overwhelming. And I would think I'd figured something out, and then I would realize I hadn't factored in an important cost, down to a very basic level of finding a manufacturer and getting a base price, but then not realizing that actually I was going to have to add my duty and customs onto that. And there was so many things that I was so unaware of. So yeah, just it literally, it went from being in school to every day being a school day in a different sense, because I had to learn so fast and so much, and it was exhausting at times. It felt overwhelming, definitely at times.
What I always feel and what I always see is that to most people it's such a important self-development journey, right? Because exactly as you say, like most people who walk into a job, I mean, some jobs are obviously slightly different and you learn new things, but the thing is, when you first start out your first business, like there is so much stuff to learn, right? And exactly as you say, like there's so much, you're not consciously aware of what you don't know yet, but there's always a ton of things, right?
Absolutely. And I think I think it was actually Gwyneth Paltrow I heard on a podcast really early on, and it was such a great thing, but she said she had made a decision that there was sort of, when she was starting Goop, her business, that she decided there was going to be no stupid questions and she was never going to feel stupid about asking a question. So I think I very much took that on board, and that's something I still like. I've started working with, an SEO company. I've started working with a digital marketing agency, subcontracting bits of work. And I just very much go in open and saying, I am learning and I want to learn all the time. And I am going to ask you questions that you may think are obvious, but that's how I get better at this. And that approach has really stood to me, I think, because it helps me learn right from the bottom layer of things. And people, really, I think they respect the honesty on another level. People are just like, okay, yeah, I get that. And I've never had a bad response to that yet.
No, and I think it's important. I mean, I see a lot of business owners being totally the opposite, and they're like, oh, I don't want to appear like I don't know what I'm talking about. And the problem is that's a great way to make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So asking questions and asking stupid questions can sometimes be the best lessons, right? Because sometimes, particularly in business, like it's the simplest thing that makes the biggest difference. As you alluded to earlier, like even things like import tax and all this sort of stuff, right? I mean, there's so many things that you don't know that you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many of those little potholes that, and I mean, I definitely fell down some of them. I made mistakes, but I think I would have made more had I not been like willing to kind of ask the questions. I suppose I was lucky as well. I had like quite a good friend here in Ireland who has her own online jewelry business, and she acted as a little bit of a mentor, so I could go to her for a lot of things. And that, that's something else I recommend for people. If there's someone who's a bit ahead of you in your journey, you can't go to somebody who is, I guess, maybe 10 years further down the line, but somebody who's a couple of years ahead, who's gone through all those little struggles and has like maybe had those little pitfalls too. That's been massively helpful to me, to have someone just that little bit further along.
Yeah, it's all about network. I know everyone says that, but particularly in the sort of early years of business, I mean, networking is just so important, right? And I think, again, this is one of the things, people don't know where to start. They don't know how to go about it and so on. And I think fundamentally, it's just getting out, meeting people. I mean, meeting other business people, meeting people. I mean, they might not be in the same kind of business as you and so on, but if you've ever started a business, you have experience. And even you yourself, like now 4 years down the line, right? Like if someone's starting up now and so on, like there's a ton they can learn from you. And
yeah, absolutely. And even when I started just doing a small bit of personal styling, it gave me some contacts. And even for that, it allowed me to tell people about the idea I had for Arlo Blue, for this brand of, basic clothing, but decent quality at a fair price. And even getting sort of reassurance from people who were in business that sounded like a good idea, that gave me. So just even, I always say to people who are starting now, I was like, talk about your idea, tell people your idea. Some people are afraid to, I think, say too much about it, or say, oh, like they will think, what, like, who am I to think about starting a business? But just like telling people I wanted to do it gave me such a leg up, and gave me belief that there was something in the idea, and that there was something behind it, and that it was possible to do it. So yeah, I absolutely always say, friends of mine are trying to start a totally different business. It's a sports sort of mixed, men's, women's type of thing here in Dublin. And I'm like, just tell everyone who you speak to in the next while what you're doing. When somebody says to you, how are you, what's new, tell them this, because you just don't know who's going to be able to help you out, who's going to, and that really worked for me. I got such amazing little insights from people in different businesses, and like just direction, and like a nod that what I was doing was probably going to work if I just worked hard enough at it.
Yeah, and also, I mean, not get discouraged, right? I see a lot of people, like, one thing I've learned to be a bit careful with is sometimes, particularly friends and family and stuff can sometimes not understand what you're trying to do and what you're wanting to do, and you occasionally have to be a little bit careful with their feedback, because again, people that love you and care about you want the best for you, but they don't necessarily know and understand business, so they might feel it's very risky and it's all these things, and now, which it probably is, but I look at it the other way around. I still look at starting business and running a business being the best experience you can ever have, because even if it doesn't work out, or you figure out it's not for you, like, that experience will make you an immensely better employee if you ever have to get a job in the future, right?
I fully agree. And And I sort of went into it in a bit of a like win-win situation, in that I hadn't fallen out of love with teaching. So I was sort of like, I just would like to try something. And as I say, I was at a stage where I wasn't able to progress in my teaching career. So there was very little to lose. I was able to take on a job share position where I was still teaching part-time. And, but absolutely, I think if I had to go back teaching somewhere down the line, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But what I've learned is just in so many ways, in terms of like practical skills, IT skills, but also, just like dealing with people and just getting things done, I think, that I would never have known.
Yeah, and that's actually, like, when I think back to school, like, my best teachers were definitely the ones that had experience behind them, right?
Yeah.
And it was teachers that, again, they were teaching for the passion of teaching, but they had done things that was very inspirational, and obviously nothing bad about teachers if they haven't done it, but again, when you go from school to university to teaching directly, like, there's just a bunch of life experience you don't have, and therefore it's hard to pass that on to students, right?
No, definitely.
I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So generally, like, where are you at the moment, and sort of what's your key challenges at this point in time?
Well, I suppose one of the things, and I was just speaking with somebody about this earlier, is that the pandemic, 2020 was actually really, really good for my business. But it was probably only my second year where we were really, on top of like looking at trends and tracking figures and stuff like that. And the beginning of 2021 in Ireland had been really good as well, because people were in lockdown, people weren't really able to get out shopping. So actually, currently the challenge is that since the restrictions have lifted a bit here in the last 4 months, people are spending their money a little bit differently again. So I suppose I'm finding it difficult to get an idea of what is actually a regular month's revenue. I thought I knew, and then the last 4 months have sort of changed that. And so that's even hard in terms of, like forecasting my buy-ins and things like that, like staff. We're hopefully, me and my partner are hoping to move next year. He was a carpenter, and he has gone back and he's becoming an airline commercial pilot. So we're going to be moving out of Dublin. So it's lots of change. And I kind of, based on the first 6 months of 2020, I was like, yes, this will all work out. I know exactly where we'll be. And now I don't know. So I suppose, like a lot of businesses, the pandemic has really thrown me, initially in a good way. It really increased our sales, and yeah, I mean, just there was so many people online at all times because people were sitting at home. But now, on the flip side of it, it's really hard to figure out what's a regular month's revenue, what's going to be, what's going to happen in the market sort of in the early part of next year. So yeah, I guess that's currently where I'm at, because it's just making forecasting everything really difficult. Forecasting how much stock to have, how many people I need helping, and yeah, so that's currently my biggest difficulty, I think.
Oh, I've had a few e-commerce clients that have actually liked it quite a lot for that reason, because the challenge is often when you run an e-commerce business, you often don't see a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
Because when you have heavy growth, what happens is that you sell a bunch of stuff, but then you need to buy even more inventory for next time around, right? So I've had quite a few people actually now here after the pandemic saying sales is slowing down a little bit, which is great because they actually have a little bit cash in hand for a change.
Yeah. No,
so,
that I can see that too. And I sort of have used that cash to like do things that we hadn't done before. Like, up to now, I had been, all the imagery I was doing myself just on my iPhone, and I've invested in like, having some proper photo shoots, like getting proper models, and like that, I had been doing everything I was the typical chief everything officer. I was doing like email marketing. I was trying to do a little bit on SEO. I was trying to do all the social media. So I suppose I've used that little bit of extra, capital that we did get into these other areas, which, it's a good complaint, but yeah, that's where I decided to put it. And again, I'm hoping that there's going to be a payoff on those things, but yeah, it's been a tricky one to figure out. Yeah.
I'm sure there will be. So yeah, no, that's good. What's been your biggest challenge the first couple of years, like in terms of managing the business? And I mean, you just mentioned working with these different contractors and so on. So what's sort of been the challenges around that, and what's been your biggest learning points from that?
I think mine is a product-based business, and I think just trying to figure out things like lead times, things like that, understanding that every date you're given, you should probably add another month to it in terms of, to allow for either a delay with your manufacturer or a delay with the logistics company or a delay at customs. So that's been something I've really struggled with, even before COVID, kind of planning that I was going to have stock in, let's say February, and then it maybe not arriving till mid-March, and you have 6 weeks where you have very little stock and you're trying it. So that sort of thing, the logistics of all that has been definitely challenging, sort of on a product base. And then, yeah, I think the other side of it is just learning about e-commerce. There was so much I didn't know, and you think you're kind of getting a handle on things, and then you realize, okay, well, for example, SEO was something only in the last year that I even realized really mattered. And so trying to get those things on board. And another thing definitely that I've decided has been important is like, hire experts where you can. I was trying to do things and doing them badly, and it was wasting time. It was, it wasn't productive. It was a false economy. I thought, okay, well, if I can just try and do this myself, but all I was doing was wasting time and not getting results. And so definitely where you can, I think if you can afford it, to let the experts do those things. And, my strengths are probably more in, a little bit more in the creativity around the social media and things like that. And, my relationships that I've built with influencers here in Ireland and that over on social media. And I think allowing myself to spend more time on that and letting the experts do those other things has definitely been a benefit. And I think I will definitely see more of that in the coming year as well.
Yeah, that's also one of my favorite things. So one of the things that I always love doing is that for a very particular reason. So I'm always looking at it and like, if I can get an expert in, like take something like Facebook ads or something.
Yeah.
If you get an expert in to do it, if they can make it run and they can make it profitable, then you can always see if, over time, it's either something you want to learn, but ideally, like if you don't want to keep paying for it, if you can train someone to do it in-house, but at least if you have a good framework for someone that really know what they're doing, it's much easier to test the idea. Because the problem is, if you're playing around with it yourself, if it's not making you money, you don't really know if it's because you don't know what you're doing, or if it's because, it just won't work, or you don't know. And it's the same thing. Like a lot of these things, you can go and pay for an expert to do it sort of once off and actually test out, does it work? Like, and the same with things like email marketing, right? Like it's very easy to, relatively easy to find a company that are pretty good at what they do and at least get a basic framework. And the beautiful thing with email, as example, is, if you have a good email flow, you don't necessarily need to constantly update, right? And like you can use, like a lot of clients we work with generally, like, they have a sort of set yearly calendar, and obviously, every year for Christmas, they have a specific flow. They obviously go in and update the products and update things a little bit, but, the flow of things is generally very much the same and so on. So it isn't that difficult, and it doesn't necessarily always need to be that expensive, right?
Yeah, and even just, you mentioned email marketing, but that, to me, I thought I was doing a pretty okay job at that. But I was like, okay, with that little bit of extra money that came in on COVID, I was like, right, let's hire somebody. And then I realized how much I wasn't doing. Like, I was like, oh, I never would have thought of that. That's so clever, So yeah, so definitely, just even that example, that expertise just is going to open up things, and that, like, I never would have thought of. So
yep, that totally makes sense.
Makes sense.
So any particular other advice for people who are sort of within the first couple of years of their business? Like any other sort of key things that you feel you have learned that you really want to share with others?
I think just sometimes admitting that it's difficult as well. Like I find when people ask you like how it's going, they really just want a quick, in general, people go, how's your business? And they want to go, yeah, it's fine. And on the outside, it can look, like things are growing really fast, and they are, but sometimes it's really hard. And like having some people that you can say, oh, this is a challenge, and like not being afraid to admit when things go wrong, because I've definitely had things where I've got it wrong. Like, again, a really silly thing I did, one of the early sets of, like, I got the measurement wrong between the waist and the underarm, and the thing was completely wrong, but I'd ordered like 400 sets of these pajamas. They were a complete failure, and I was so embarrassed, like, that I had, because it was such a silly mistake, and it was on me. But yeah, mistakes happen, and you can bet I'm not going to make that mistake again. So I think, just being able to say, like, admit that you've made mistakes, and like tell people that when those happen, because I've got such comfort from hearing those stories from other people, to say, oh yeah, when I've shared that with other business people, they were like, oh yeah, well, wait till I tell you what I did, and I think that admitting that mistakes happen, there can be very much this mentality about entrepreneurs that you hustle, 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 and you don't get anything wrong. And yeah, I don't think that's realistic. I think we all get stuff wrong. So I think if you can be honest about your mistakes, and like, I find it with all things in life, actually, the more honest you are with people, the more you hear back that, like, other people have been through similar things. So I think be open about your mistakes, and like, definitely it's a cliche, but like, you learn so much from them. They are definitely such a key learning curve, those mistakes. So
Yeah, and I love the first thing you said in particular. I think so often people are, I mean, I meet lots of business people all the time, and you're always like, how's business going? And it's like, oh yeah, it's fantastic, it's fantastic. And half the time, it's like, it's probably not.
yeah.
Right. But totally, I mean, what you say, like, the key thing as well, when you have a good network, like, people love to help. Right. So if you do have issues and you do have challenges, like, at least my experience is that, if you actually ask for help, and I know many people struggle to do that, but if you actually share your problems and you ask for help, like, you are a lot more likely to get it. If you just sit around hoping for things to automatically sort themselves out, that's often less likely to happen. So
yeah, 100%. And again, it was a little bit difficult for me as a teacher, because sometimes as a teacher, you are kind of like, you're so used to doing everything for yourself, and like, sometimes in a day I hardly speak to another adult when I was teaching, and so that sort of asking for help initially was a bit of a strange one for me. But I got really good at it, and I also got good at, like, like, even the asking. And I used to terrify me that if I asked someone for help and they said no, or down to, like, sometimes offering influencers my product on Instagram, and the first time somebody said, oh, your product isn't for me, I was like mortified, and I was so embarrassed, and and I was like, oh, this product is clearly a disaster. And then you step back and you're like, that's fine, that's fair, that's their prerogative. And then the next time it happens, when somebody says no to something, you're like, okay, this is part and parcel of it. And yeah, now it's not, I still don't love it, but that when you get a no from somebody, it's not the end of the world. You're like, this is just part of the process, I think. So
definitely.
Yeah.
Excellent, Sinead. Any particular resources you want to share with the audience here before we finish up? Like, any resources that have been super helpful for you, or
one of the podcasts and books I've listened to, I'm sure you've heard, The One Thing. I found that super, I think middle of last year, when things were really picking up for us, and I was still pretty much working completely by myself. I was doing it all by myself. That was super. I was like, what am I trying to do this month? Okay, one thing, and how are we getting to it? So I found that podcast and book super, super helpful. And the John Lee Dumas book, The Common Path to Uncommon Success.
Yep.
That's a really good one as well. Again, it's just kind of niching down. Like, for me, I guess, I keep coming back to that, like, what's our one thing that sells all the time? What's our one, so like our classic white t-shirt, and you kind of go, and all roads lead back to that, come back to the basics of the thing. So to me, they were two that I found super, super useful. And the JLG podcast as well, the Entrepreneurs on Fire, I found that really, really good. Just, what I think in all of these, I'm a fanatic podcast listener. I listen to so many, and what, there's just often one thing in each podcast, and you're like, oh, I can use that, or that gives you a little bit of a motivation, or that just that you resonate with. So I found we're incredibly lucky, I guess, today, how much we can access in terms of podcasts and YouTube and all those things. So yeah, just find your niche in podcasts, something like that, and go, and you will be able to access so much information that is free.
Totally. And I think so. One of my biggest learning points have been finding a good balance. So I'm sort of planning in time to learn and planning in time to action, because I think depending on people's personality, like some people love learning a lot and struggle to actually put it into action.
Yeah.
So I know for myself, I need to have a pretty solid sort of limitation on my learning, so I don't just spend my entire life sitting listening and learning.
That's actually so true. It's so funny you should say that, because only recently I was thinking, I was like, I feel a little bit overloaded with all the information I'm taking over. And then there was a point where I was only listening to the One Thing podcast, and that was really good because the message is so simple. It's like one thing and you keep coming back, whereas sometimes when you're taking it in from too many areas, it's easy to get distracted again and sort of lose that focus. So
yeah. Awesome, Sinead. If people are eager to get hold of you or connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
So our website is arloblue.com, and that's where you will find all of our lovely products. And we're on Instagram at Arlo Blue Apparel, and Facebook the same name. So that's where we're at. And yeah, we're there, and we're always ready to chat.
Awesome. Well, Sinead, thank you very much for joining me today. It was awesome having you on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's actually the first podcast I've been invited to speak on, so it was lovely to chat. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. And to the audience, thank you for listening all the way to the end. We'll be back again next week.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.